Okay, good morning. I hope you are doing well. To complete the applications of MLP and RBFN, I thought that I would go ahead with this presentation. This will give you a real life exposure to the application of MLP and RBFN for a very interesting kind of application, and that is pattern recognition of electrocardiogram signals. So today's agenda is pattern classifiers, performance metrics, a case study as I said, 2-class QRS classification with MLP, what is the need of data pre-processing, how is it done, and followed by MATLAB demo, again the case study with RBFN for the same problem. So pattern recognition is used for classification of a pattern. I've already told you that a neural network can have different applications. One of the applications is pattern classification, and when you actually classify the patterns, you tend to recognize it, identify the relevant features about the pattern from original information, and then use a feature extractor. So we actually do not use the patterns as they are, we try to extract the features. We've already seen what are the features and what exactly is the concept of feature space in the previous lectures. Now these measurements are passed to the classifier, which performs the actual classification, that is, it determines at which of the existing classes to classify the pattern. Here we assume that the existence of natural grouping is there, that is, we have some a priori knowledge about the classes and the data. So we know that there are two classes embedded in the the exemplars are span over two classes. So there are two classes existing, we know that, and then we are supposed to classify them. So we have to have the information about the classes, the number of classes. For example, we may know the exact or approximate number of classes and the correct classification of some given patterns, which are called as the training patterns. So as I said, we require to train the neural network, and we need to know what those patterns, which class they belong to, when we go for the training. This type of information and the type of the features that may suggest which classifier to apply for a given application. So as I said, neural network learns from the data, so we have some kind of insight about which type of classifier can be used for a particular application. Now there are two different types of classifiers, parametric and non-parametric. A classifier is called parametric if the discriminant function have a well-defined mathematical function form, that is, it can be a Gaussian, that depends on a set of parameters, that is mean and variance. So when we go for most of the times we talk about statistical parameters here, so that is the reason why they are called as parametric classifiers. There are different algorithms in the classical statistical classifiers or parametric classifiers. In non-parametric classifiers, there is no assumed functional form. Non-parametric classification is completely driven by the data. These methods require a great deal of data for acceptable performance, but they are free from the assumptions about the shape of the discriminant functions or the distribution of the data. So naturally we learn from the data. Then we have something called as minimum distance classifiers. If the training patterns seem to form clusters, we often use classifiers which use distance functions for classifying. Most of the many times Euclidean distance is a good distance measure. If each class is represented by a single prototype called the cluster center, we can use a minimum distance classifier to classify a new pattern. If you remember, we have used this, we have seen this concept when we saw the k nearest neighbor classifier. A similar modified classifier is used if every class consists of several clusters. The nearest neighbor classifier classifies a pattern by measuring its distance, naturally the Euclidean distance, from the training patterns and choosing the class to which the nearest neighbor belongs. Sometimes the a priori information is the exact or approximate number of classes. Each training pattern is in one of these classes, but its specific classification is not known. In this case, we use algorithms to determine the cluster class centers by minimizing some performance index and are found iteratively, and then a new pattern is classified using a minimum distance classifier. This is the k-means clustering algorithm that we have seen. Once we get the number of clusters, we can then use the Euclidean distance to find out which class it may belong to. Statistical classifiers, many times the training patterns of various classes overlap, for example when they are originated by some statistical distributions. In this case, statistical approach is appropriate, particularly when the various distribution functions of the classes are well known. A statistical classifier must also evaluate the risk associated with each classification, which measures the probability of misclassification or error. The Bayes classifier, based on Bayes formula from probability theory, minimizes the total expected risk. So we come with some kind of Bayes classifier. You must have heard of Bayes classifier, so it belongs to this category. Then there are fuzzy classifiers. Quite often classification is performed with some degree of uncertainty. We have already seen the concept of fuzziness. So fuzziness is being vague and not precise. Either the classification outcome itself may be in doubt, or the classified pattern X may belong in some degree to more than one class. We therefore introduce what is called as a fuzzy classification, wherein a pattern is a member of every class with some grade of membership. Here naturally we are not having some kind of crisp classification, but some kind of fuzziness associated with it. For such a situation, the crisp k-means algorithm is generalized and it takes a different form called as a fuzzy k-means or fuzzy c-means clustering. And after the cluster centers are determined, each incoming pattern is given a final set of grades of membership which determine the degree of classification in the various clusters. These are the non-parametric classifiers. Artificial neural network approach assumes, as other approaches before, that a set of training patterns and their correct classification is available. So we already know the ground truth. The architecture of the net, which includes input layer, output layer and hidden layers, may be very complex. We have already seen such an example. It is characterized by a set of weights and activation function which determine how any information, that is your input signal, is being transmitted to the output layer. Neural network is trained by training patterns and it adjusts to the weights until the correct classifications are obtained. We already seen the backpropagation mechanism to do this. It is then used to classify arbitrary unknown patterns. There are several popular neural network classifiers like the multilayer perceptron, Reidel basis function neural networks, self-organizing feature maps and support vector machines. So all these come under what is called as a semi-parametric or semi-parametric classifier. So this is the tree which shows the classification of the classifiers. That is, we have classification done in two different ways, supervised and unsupervised. In supervised, we have decision trees, we have Bayes theorem, we have discriminant analysis. In decision trees, they make use of what is called as a popular random forest. Bayes, it uses parametric, semi-parametric, non-parametric. Okay. Whereas in parametric, you have specifically the Bayes networks. In semi-parametric, we have neural networks and support vector machines. And in discriminant analysis, we have linear discriminant analysis and quadratic discriminant analysis. Whereas if you look at unsupervised, it is simply the clustering which does the classification. Now when we talk about classifiers, we have to find out measures of how good is your classifier. So a very important metric is called as the confusion matrix. As you can see, it is simply a matrix. We know the ground truth that there are so many number of let us say classes, so many number of patterns or exemplars belonging to say normal type and which belong to the abnormal type. Now I am talking from the perspective of electrocardiogram pattern, the QRS complex. So if I say normal and abnormal, there are the two classes, and we already know the ground truth that there are, let us say, 200 exemplars in the training set for belonging to the normal, 200 belonging to the abnormal. So whenever the classifier actually comes out with the output, so this is the classifier output, and here this particular matrix will then tell you, so if I am having sizable amount here, let us say 200 exemplars are there for corresponding to normal, and in the classifier correctly classifies all 200 of them. Okay, so there we have let us say so ideal output of an ideal classifier is a diagonal matrix, okay, where you will have all 200 here, and for abnormal you have 200 here. So again, from the perspective of abnormal, okay, from the perspective of abnormal, this becomes the true positive. If it is the perspective of the normal, this would become the true positive TP. And then whenever we are having, let us say, true positive, so let us say from the point of view of the abnormal, let us say patterns. Now if they are classified wrongly by the classifier as normal, we call them as a false negative, okay, whereas if it is classified if the abnormal is classified as normal, we call it as the false positive, sorry, here. And if these are classified as normal, in that case it becomes a false negative, and here if it classifies correctly as normal, then we call it as the true negative. So understand these concepts very firmly, because this forms the basis of your entire classification performance. So I will repeat this again if you want, that whenever I have the classifier giving me correct output of, let us say, 200 patterns here, okay, it becomes a true positive. This is from the perspective of, let us say, the abnormal beats. That is the reason why it is highlighted with a different color. If these abnormal beats are wrongly classified as let us say normal, wrongly classified as normal, we call them as the false positives. Okay, so just make sure that you understand this. So the confusion matrix is necessarily a table or a matrix where the true classification is compared with the output of the classifier. Let us assume that the true classification is the row and the classifier output is the column. Classification of each sample is added to the row of the true classification. A perfect classification matrix provides a confusion matrix that has only the diagonal populated. So if the classifier is ideal, you will have 200 here, 200 here, okay, and 0 here, 0 here. All other entries are 0. The classification error is the sum of diagonal entries divided by the total number of samples. We'll see this with an example. Other classifier performance metrics are sensitivity, specificity, positive predictivity, and false positive rate. So what is sensitivity? Is the fraction of abnormal ECG beats that are correctly detected among all the abnormal ECG beats. So it becomes TP, true positive, divided by sum of true positive and false negative. Specificity is the fraction of normal ECG beats that are correctly classified among all the normal ECG beats. So it becomes true negative divided by true negative plus false positive. Positive predictivity is the fraction of real abnormal ECG beats in all detected beats. So you have true positive divided by true positive plus false negative, false positive, sorry. False positive rate is nothing but 1 minus specificity. Turns out to be FP, false positive divided by true negative plus false positive. Classification rate is another parameter or a metric. It is nothing but true negative plus true positive divided by all the sum of all the exemplars. Mean square error, we already have seen the mean square error. So it is a measure used only as the stopping criteria while training the neural network. Percentage average accuracy is the total accuracy of the classifier. So true positive for normal divided by total plus true positive. So it is the total accuracy, average of the accuracy multiplied by 100. That is the reason why we get percentage accuracy. Training time is the CPU time required for training a neural network, described in terms of time per epoch per total exemplars in seconds. So it tells you how fast is your classifier for training. Pre-processing time is the CPU time required for generating the transform part, that is extracting the features, okay, and that also is in seconds. Resources consumed for the ANN topology is the sum of the weights and the biases for the first layer and the second layer which we call as the adjustable or the free parameters of the network. Another interesting metric is called as the receiver operating characteristics, or ROC. The receiver operating characteristic is a metric used to check the quality of the classifier. For each class of a classifier, ROC applies some threshold values across the interval 0 to 1 to the output. Remember, we are talking about the output of the classifier now. For each threshold, two values are calculated: true positive ratio, that is the number of outputs greater or equal to the threshold divided by the number of 1 targets, and false positive ratio, the number of outputs less than the threshold divided by the number of 0 targets. That is the correct and whatever we have expected over at the output. ROC gives us the insight of the classifier performance, especially in high sensitivity and high selectivity region. So it actually tells us how better your classifier is. This is the picture of a typical ROC. Now this is nothing but the true positive rate versus false positive rate, and for an ideal classifier, the area under curve for this, if you see closely, that this is a very good classifier because this is the trace. If you see it, I hope it is visible to you. So this blue trace over here, so you can see that the area under the ROC curve is nearly equal to 1. So for an ideal classifier, area under curve for ROC will be equal to 1. Now we start with a case study, 2-class QRS classification with MLP. The problem statement is: design a system to correctly classify extracted QRS complexes into 2 classes, normal and abnormal. A typical normal sample will look like this, pattern will look like this, whereas an abnormal pattern will look like this. Okay, so you see that there is a distinction in the patterns over here. Now visually we can have this kind of classification. That is how we don't require a training for this. Just by looking at the patterns we can say that is basically the power of the human brain. But now if you want to automate that process, in that case we have to use the artificial neural networks over there. But before that we have to pre-process the data. What do you mean by pre-processing? First of all, there is a DC component embedded in the signal. If you remember the data acquisition for electrocardiogram, you have the electrodes, and then we have the pre-amplifiers, and then we have, actually they are the instrumentation amplifiers, and then we amplify the signal still further. So naturally some kind of DC content is going to be included there, and that is what we want to remove. So the very first thing that operation that is required is mean adjust, that is removing the DC component. If you remember, mean is nothing but the DC or the average value, and that we are going to subtract from each sample. Okay, we can use all 180 points. So remember, if you look at this very carefully, you will see that the entire ECG is captured in, let us say, 180 samples. Okay, how do I get this 180 samples? Let us say if I consider the peak point, that is also called as the R. This is Q, R and S. So if this is R, then 90 samples on one side of R and 89 samples on one side of R is what we have considered. So the center of this pattern is exactly the R peak. This is called as a R peak. So naturally we get 180 samples, 90 plus 90. Okay, so all this we have 180 samples. So we have all 180 points for training, but it possesses a computational overhead. So if you give this signal directly, if you use this pattern directly for the input, you will require 180 input neurons. Okay, which is going to be a very clumsy thing. So we can use features for training which minimizes the response of ANN to noise also. So let us say if there is some noise also over here, in that case that noise also will be used as a can be used as a or rather will be erroneously used as a input signal or input, and which may lead to problems. So that is the reason why we cannot use the ECG pattern directly. So we have to extract the features. Training time of the ANN will also reduce because the size of the network will also reduce. Overall accuracy improves. Generalization, if you remember the concept of memorization and generalization, we have the generalization which is expected rather than memorization. Feature extraction in transform domain can use discrete cosine transform. So for example, here in this case I have used discrete cosine transform to find out the important features. And another important thing is one hot encoding for the target. So instead of a binary, if you remember, we can have different types of encoding schemes. We can have binary, we can have one hot encoding, or we can even go for a grayscale code. But most of the times artificial neural networks will require or may suggest that one hot encoding technique is very good because it will have a better discrimination between the two classes. Selection of significant components. How do I select? What are the important things that I have to extract or features that I have to extract? So what I will say here that I will retain only the components. Remember that we are going for discrete cosine transformation. Now 180 samples, when we applied discrete cosine transform, of course a single dimensional one, you must have studied two-dimensional discrete cosine transform for images, but since this is a one-dimensional signal, we can have 1D DCT to perform the transformation. So we have 180 samples. Out of that, if I apply DCT, I am going to get 180 discrete cosine, let us say, coefficients. But what I will do is I will retain only those components or DCT components which retain 99.5% of the signal energy. It means that most of the information of the signal, wherever it is up to 99.5%, that I will retain. Other components I can safely discard. Another important thing which I am going to use it is the percent root mean difference. Now whenever I have a discrete cosine transform and if I truncate or retain only the important parts of the coefficients, now if I reconstruct that using again inverse discrete cosine transform, the reconstructed waveform and the original waveform may have some difference, and that is given by what is called as a percent root mean difference, and it is nothing but square root of summation as I goes from 0 to n, that is every component, original value minus reconstructed value, square of that, divided by summation I goes from 0 to n x square, that is the square of the original sample value. That multiplied by 100 gives me the percent root mean difference. So if I apply discrete cosine transform to my signal, what do I get is, you can see here it goes from 0 to 179, that is 180 coefficients, and you can see that most of the energy, okay, if this is the plot of this is the cumulative plot of all the coefficients, then I say that the energy, you can see here very clearly that almost all the energy of the signal is achieved with the first 30 components. Okay, so if I take only the first 30 components, if I discard all these remaining ones, it doesn't matter because the signal energy that I am going to preserve is 99.86%. okay, so that corresponds to the 30 components, the first 30 components. Now the PRD, that is the percent root mean difference that I get, is about 0.5343%, which is quite acceptable. So we have to perform an analysis as to how many components to retain. Okay, so in this case I tried with 5 components coefficients, and then I got PRD as 9.8, signal energy only 35, so this is not useful. What 15, again the same kind of issue, 30, 99.8, and if you see, if I go for 40, there is no much significant difference over here in the signal energy, and so 30 will be quite okay for us. Okay, so this is the optimal number of coefficients which I can retain and use for training the neural network. This is the effect of reconstruction, or it shows the reconstruction errors. And for coefficients number 30, you'll see that the PRD also is quite acceptable. So we finalize that 30 coefficients only will be used. Now important thing is about the dataset creation. It is always desirable that we have an equal number of exemplars from each class for the training dataset. Now equal number of exemplars will mean that the network will be trained equally for all the classes. So there is no favoring of any class during the training. If the number of exemplars are unequal, we have to deskew the classifier decision. Okay, deskewing simply scales the output according to the probability of the input classes. So once we get the output, you have to deskew it if specifically if there are unequal number of samples or exemplars. In real life situation scenario, it may be possible that some classes you may have some very small exemplars of a particular class. So in that case, you have to apply the deskewing techniques. Data randomization is a very important step before training. Otherwise, repetitive training by the same class may not allow the network to converge. Remember that the error gradient is important for achieving global minima if it exists. Partitioning the data into 3 disjoint sets, so we can have 3 disjoint sets: training set, cross-validation set, and testing set. The cross-validation is very important. Just like training, cross-validation ensures that whatever training is being taking place is in the correct direction. So you have 2 different mean square errors corresponding to training and corresponding to cross-validation. And generally, we'll see about that. What we can do is we have to avoid memorization and to incorporate, or let us say, in order to achieve generalization, we use the mean square error on the cross-validation set and not on the training set. And then finally we have the testing set, where we can test the performance of our classifier. Before the data is presented to the net for training, we have to normalize the data in the range, let us say -1 to 1 both included. Okay, this is a very good, this has to be done, so because this helps in faster network learning. How to normalize? There is a formula for normalization. Amplitude and offset are given, so we have to find out the amplitude and the offset. Amplitude is given as upper bound minus lower bound divided by maximum minus minimum. Offset is given as upper bound minus amplitude multiplied by the maximum. To normalize the data, we simply process the data and multiply it by amp and add offset to it. To denormalize, what I do, I subtract the offset and divide by amp. So the process of normalization and denormalization has to be done afterwards, before we start with the training and after we complete the training respectively. This is the methodology. A continuous stream of continuous time series of ECG signals is available to us. We extract equal lengths of signals. We pre-process, that is mean adjust, remove the DC component, transform the extracted signal, DCT on that, extract the feature, and then we go for the classification, where we can have 2 classes. So this is the flow chart sort of. So use back. So I have developed written a code for the back propagation. It's now a function which I will be using, and use this back p fun. This is a function which I have created for training. Similarly, you can use another function which I have used for test, back propagation function for testing, and compute the confusion matrix and all these other parameters. Okay. So now we will switch over to MATLAB for demonstration.